Good evening, everyone. We'll just wait one more minute as people are rolling in, and then we'll get started right away. I don't want to waste any time. We have a jam-packed event. It's good to see some familiar faces in there. I won't say hello to everyone. I'll do a brief introduction of a couple of people on our team, then we'll just jump right into it.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Good afternoon.
We don't want on.
No. People are on. I'm just waiting to begin. People are filling up the waiting room, and I'm just going to give one more minute, and then we'll get started. I see David and Meredith are here. Those are the main people that we can see. Good to see you all. But I do want to make sure that we have folks give.
Kareem, if you make me co-host, I can let people in the waiting room if they come late.
Okay, great.
Hello, I'm Hussam, the Arabic interpreter.
Thank you.
No problem.
My AirPods are working today. I don't know why.
It's hot.
Hi, Cynthia.
Okay, we're going to get started. And Liza, thank you for that offer, but I'm just going to, I'll keep it going here.
Hello, everyone.
And make sure, let's start really briefly with a couple of quick introductions. My name is Kareem Weaver. I'm on the Education Committee of the NAACP, Oakland's branch, serving under the leadership of George Holland, who's the president of our branch 1051. Please go to naacp.org, consider becoming a member and joining. Anyone from any ethnic group can join, but we're primarily focused on the civil rights of African-American kids and also kids of other ethnic groups. But we want to make sure that we put that out there, that we invite everyone to join. We meet the second Saturday.
So I might as well put them away. Uh-oh, did they just start working? Because then I lost them.
There we go.
Denise, you on?
Kareem, I think you need to remute everyone because sometimes if people are doing it at the same time, it doesn't work.
Okay. I've unmuted the Libens and I've unmuted myself, and I'll unmute Cynthia, and that's it. So listen, we're just grateful for everyone taking the time tonight to be here. I do want to give the chair of our committee, Cynthia Adams, a moment just to speak to everyone to kind of frame the evening, and then I'll do another brief introduction. Meredith, I got your notes, just a few of those slides we'll do, and then we'll kick it right to the Libens and we'll jump right into curriculum, get questions answered, etc. So let me unmute you, Cynthia. And if you don't mind, a little bit of framing, the floor is yours. Make sure I can unmute. Well, I'm having a little challenge unmuting her. Cynthia, I'll get to you a little bit later. I'm having a little hard time unmuting you. And there you go. Cynthia, can you hear me? You can go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm looking forward for this exciting event that we're getting ready to have. And I'm going to sit back and I'm going to listen. And after they finish, I will be able to ask questions. I just want to thank everyone for coming on board and listening to what we need to hear about our students in our community. And I'm excited. I'm really, really excited about it. So I'm gonna turn it back over to Kareem, and I'm gonna sit back like everyone else and listen to what everyone has to say. And again, thank you on behalf of the Oakland Branch NAACP Education Chair. Thank you.
Okay. So before I introduce David and Meredith, let me just share my screen here and provide a little bit of context as to what the heck is going on. First of all, let me just say that our chat, we're going to be very mindful of the chat this evening. We do have board member folks, candidates, etc. This is not a political theater time. This is a time to learn. So just want to put that out there. You have a chance to engage later. We have people from labor, from nonprofits, from schools. We have teachers, principals. we have parents, we have, you name it. And so this is a community meeting around curriculum and what's best for our kids and what are the options for our kids and what's being seen around the country. So I just want to frame that. This isn't the time for grandstanding, et cetera. We have a learning orientation as we go through this. So very quickly, just share a couple of things with you all. I hope you all can see my screen. All right. So the district has identified some gaps. It's not just the district, it's all across the state of California and throughout the country. Many of the popular curriculums that we've been using, it's now come to light that they're missing key pieces, key foundational components of literacy. They lack explicit instruction. I won't get too far into it, but it really didn't attend to the science as needed. There's always debate in education, but there's some things that are settled. There is a research consensus around how to teach reading and neuroscience to back that up. And so that's pretty much done. The question is, do our curricula, are the things that we're using, are the materials that teachers are being given, are they being given what they need? And is it attuned to the needs of our students? I won't go too far into that, but what I will do is send this out later. I'll send out a copy of the full introduction. It lasts about 10 minutes. This only lasts about 2. And if you click on this little guy reading a book, it will go to a video presentation of this introduction, go through all of these things. I submit that it's worth taking a look. Many of you are familiar with this, the ladder of reading. The district has realized, hey, about 40% of kids are going to be okay with what we've been doing. The materials, the PD, you've heard people say that there's more than one way to teach reading, and that's true, there is. Actually, what's more accurate to say is there is more than one way to teach about 40% of kids. Broad instructional strategies and methods will work. There's lots of different ways that you can do it, but then there's that 65% or so that need things done in an explicit, systematic, sequential way, and we're after those kids. Everyone wants those kids. So the question is, how do we get those kids? How do we get them where they need to be and do it in a way that it's workable for teachers, for schools, for parents, but get kids where they need to go. And the state of California says that dyslexia is one of the greatest causes of low reading achievement in the state. So we've got to figure out how to attend to those bottom 2 boxes, and our curriculum has to be aligned to that. And about 51% of our students of our schools have between 90 and 95% poverty. So we also have to find something that works in that context. In addition to poverty, you have other dynamics around language learning, around, race and class and trauma, everything else. But we do know that the majority of our students, the majority of our schools have between 90 and 99% of its students who receive free and reduced lunch. So something's got to work in their context. And matter of fact, we can cross-reference this with student achievement, and our elementary schools lay out like this. So we really have to figure out how to reach these kids down here or on this portion of the graph, right? These other ones, they've been benefiting from what we've been selecting and what we've been doing, but we've got to have these kids in mind. If equity is going to be real, what is it going to take to move these folks? And that's why we're here today. The district has made progress. We've been piloting Adelante and EL. Many of you know this, and we have moved closer to standard proficiency. DFS means distance from standard, and you'll see a positive change. We've used EL in some schools. We've used Adelante in our dual language schools, and there has been growth. Is it what the parents want? Is it as fast as we want? No, but there has been some growth. The question is that, we have questions about that. Usability, learning curve, cost, et cetera, but we just want to hear the lay of the land as we lift that up. And we also have members of our curriculum selection committee who will make recommendations to the chief academic officer and superintendent. So we're glad that they could join us this evening, including Michael Ray, who's leading that work. All right, that's it. So the Libens, before I get to the questions. Let's get to the Libens. So who are these folks and why did I ask them? Why did we ask them to come? So Meredith Libens worked with states, districts, schools, publishers, curriculum review organizations to ensure strong student learning through the Common Core Standards. She actually worked to synthesize the research for the Common Core Standards for ELA and led the work to create Model Detroit, which is a cache of synthesized lessons for teachers to use. She led that work. Then you have David, who's worked with student achievement partners alongside Meredith, and he's focused his work on with publishers interested in making high quality, comprehensive ELA curriculum, and that they're aligned to college and career readiness standards. He's also developed training courses, has consulted and coached many districts, states, schools, working with educators on how to teach students to learn and how to learn from complex texts. This powerhouse couple has done curriculum audits and given districts detailed reviews of high quality curricular options to consider. They're experts in the field and a resource treasure for whomever they support. So the NAACP and Fulcrum are so grateful for the gift of their time and their willingness to support our community. We couldn't be thrilled. They've been generous, they've been great partners. They've tolerated my insistence and my urging for so long, and they finally said, okay, yeah, we'll come, thank you. So we really appreciate you as our community is trying to figure this out together to figure out how we can move forward to best serve our kids together and really understand what our options are. So with that, we have David and Meredith. You may have a few introductory words, and of course, I've got tons of questions for you. We'll have an interview format. I have questions for you. We'll roll out. I'll allow you, time to speak. And then there are some questions that were pre-submitted that I'll ask at opportune times. And I think we have one from a member of OEA that we've been talking back and forth, and she's got a question that she wants to ask personally, so we'll make time for that as well. But first, I'll turn the floor over for you all before I start asking my questions. There you go.
Okay, we're on. Perfect. Hi, everybody. All right, let me start with full disclosure, because as Kareem said, I've worked with a lot of publishers. Some of the publishers I'm going to talk about today, I've given advice to, and they've paid me. Core Knowledge Language Arts that you may know, I've worked with them and I've been paid by them. The American Reading Company, which you might not be familiar with, but I've worked with them and they've paid me. And Amplify, that does Core Knowledge Language Arts, I've worked with them and they've paid me. EL Education, I've worked with them more than all of the other techs combined, more than all the other programs combined. But that was when I was working with Student Achievement Partners, so I did not directly get any money from them. And the only one of these programs that I'll mention today that we both feel very strong about, that I have not worked with substantially and not been paid by, is Bookworms. So that's the full disclosure. I also think it's important to say just very quickly, because we're talking about a lot of research. Meredith and I ran schools. The reason we're in business, the reason we're doing this is we started a school in Harlem in the early 90s, a public school. There were no such thing as charter schools then in New York State. That school got the lowest reading scores in the city of New York. So you should be impressed. It's very hard to get the lowest. There's a lot of schools in New York City, like over 1,000. Not everybody gets the lowest reading scores in the city. Over a period of years, we brought those scores up so that they were higher, over a period of 5 years or so they were higher than any non-gifted school in the city of New York. I got contacted by someone working for the chancellor. He asked if we would speak to the principal's K-8. I said, no, I'm not going to be able to accomplish anything in 45 minutes.
But you will tonight.
But I will tonight. That was David Coleman, who some of you might recognize was the prime architect of the Common Core Standards. And that's how we came to both synthesize the research for the Common Core Standards and determine the complexity levels for the Common Core Standards. And since then, we've been doing this work around the country. And as Kareem said, most of my work has been with publishers.
Just a couple more things. So we're school people. Between us, we have 40 plus years, K-12, teacher prep. And I think we still identify as, as people who walk in as teachers. And that's really important because I think a lot of these burning questions that are in front of you they have to work. First and foremost, they have to work for your children, and quite clearly looking just at those scatter data. What's been going on in Oakland is not working for the children. That also probably means it's not working for your teachers. And so those are really important perspectives. And they're certainly not working for the families who send their best children into Oakland schools every day. So I was at an event once where I was one of the people talking, and a woman stood there and she'd done a ton of work with pediatric hospitals. And she said, you know, in emergency, in NICUs and PICUs, they don't start saying, you know, 80%'s not bad. If we can save 80% of the kids, that's not bad. They start from saying, we are going to save 100% of these children that come into our intensive cares. And when they fail, which they do, they pounce on that and analyze it. So I really think first of all, we now need to change our paradigm about how we look at schooling children, Black and brown children, poor children, all children. And that question is, why aren't we going after 100% and then pouncing on the few who fail? I mean, I know the data, it's been persistent for decades that between maybe as many as 13% of children have some brain-based reason that it's going to be really hard for them to learn to read, and they need even more and special stuff, and California's been pouncing on that, and that's super important. And what's good for those kids in a lot of ways is good for other children too. But it shouldn't be, we shouldn't have failure rates like we have for our children. We can do a lot better. And a program that gets a school building so students and teachers can rely on it is certainly a really important place to start to support teachers and children, and so parents can rely on what's happening inside their school buildings and trust that if they have to move, it isn't a radical change. So David's going to do the majority of the talking tonight because he has been under the hoods of all these programs, but I will probably pipe in from time to time.
All right, the evidence. There's two kinds of evidence. There's evidence based on the science, and there's evidence based on results. What's happened to students' outcomes as a result of these programs. Let's start with evidence in the science of reading. The evidence in the science of reading, as Kareem said, is overwhelming in systematic phonics. It's overwhelming in all areas, but it's usually talked about with regard to systematic phonics. That is strong evidence for that, but that's not the only evidence in the science of reading. Maybe I should start with what there is no evidence for. There is absolutely zero evidence for leveled reading programs. The idea that students are restricted to reading text at whatever level they tested out on, and those students who tested higher read rich, complex, wonderful text, and those students who don't read simple text, and they know who they are, and everybody knows who everybody is, and it's really been a form of educational apartheid for like 30 or 40 years. There's no evidence that it works, clearly. There is no evidence whatsoever for units of study, the program from Teachers College. It's been the most popular program in the United States for a quarter of a century, and there's not one systematic review showing evidence for that program. Not one. There is no evidence for any basal program yet, not in a randomly controlled trial study, not in a pre and post, not one single piece of evidence for that. There is strong, now I just had to get that out right away. With regard to the science of reading, there's strong evidence beyond, in addition to phonics, for fluency instruction. There is strong evidence for the importance of knowledge of the world, wide-ranging knowledge of the world, not knowledge of one sector of the world. There is strong evidence for the importance of vocabulary and how best to teach it. All of that is under the umbrella of evidence from the science of reading. Systematic phonics, fluency, the importance of wide knowledge, the importance of vocabulary. There is evidence from student outcomes. As I said, none for units of study, none for the basals. There is some evidence for EL education K-5 from a study in Memphis, that if that's one of the areas that you're looking at, I would recommend looking into it. It's not overwhelmingly powerful evidence, but it's a district similar to what you guys have, and they've had some positive results with EL. So that's definitely worth looking at. The only national evidence for EL is from a middle school study that came out last year. And if any of these things you have any trouble with tracking down, just email me. I'm glad to send anything to you. So that is The results of that were an improvement in student outcomes. Was it as large as I would have liked to seen, or they? No, but it was real. There is scattered evidence for EL education K-5. EL education is now in over 1,000 schools. They have not put together a national study yet. I keep asking them for it, a national study yet for K-5. But I know I come across some schools, K-5, that have shown what's called pre and post tests. You know, before you started this curriculum, here were your scores. After, here were your scores. There is definitely some of that with 1,000 schools. And if that's one of the curriculums, and I believe it is, that you're seriously considering, they will more than likely be glad to help you find those schools and contact those schools.
Same with Detroit. We're in close touch with leadership there.
Oh, yeah.
And Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and other big districts that have implemented EL. There are other things about it we'll get into in a minute, but they're open. They're just, the closure of schools last year, wiped out testing. There are some districts that were actually looking forward to their results. We were really hoping Detroit would smack the pants off the rest of Michigan because it deserves it. But those, the kids weren't evaluated last year at all.
There is no evidence that I'm aware of for core knowledge, language arts, K-5. And I keep asking them, and I'm pretty sure they'd sent it to me because they know I talk. And I have not gotten that. Wit and wisdom, K-8. Baltimore showed a small increase after 1 year of implementation of wit and wisdom. That is not to be discounted. Usually when schools adopt a new program, the first 1 or 2 years shows a decrease in student scores. So for Baltimore, that also has a lot of obstacles that they're dealing with, to show a small increase is absolutely not to be discounted.
The reason why scores plummet, it's sort of obvious when you think about it, but teachers have to get their sea legs under them and learn the program. And in a lot of these situations, you're talking radical change. I mean, if you're going from a sort of disjointed thing to, there's just a lot of balls balls in the air that you hold for these rich programs, and they have a long learning curve. So that's the reason for that. Usually you see a dip.
The strongest evidence by far for student outcomes is bookworms. In 2 low-performing, low-income districts, in 1 year, in one case, in 2 years, they've got statistically strong increase in student outcomes, not in schools, in an entire district. Now, you know why? Based on what just Meredith said, it is by far the easiest program to learn and begin to implement successfully. So that's evidence with results. And also, bookworms actually has a randomly controlled trial run by the University of Chicago. None of these other programs or none of the basals has anything like that. And again, I can send you all of these things. I'm going to quickly go through the pluses and minuses of each program.
And just the reason these are the ones we want to talk about is all of these are knowledge rich. They build knowledge and they build vocabulary systematically. Do they tell everybody's story? No. Do they, so that is, and we'll get there. We can certainly answer questions about it. That is work that all of these publishers are undertaking, but what you would receive, say, next fall, you would still need to supplement in order to be more representative, for children to hear enough of their own stories told, and to have author representation and the diversity you want. So that is just to cut to that chase. There's there's no holy grail out there that has everything put together at this point.
But all of these programs have complex text. All of these programs grow vocabulary, and all of these programs are knowledge-based, so they grow knowledge. Core Knowledge Language Arts has a strong foundational skills program. Systematic Phonics, based on science, has a strong knowledge base. They have a huge problem with texts after 2nd grade, because what happens with core knowledge, if you adopt the program K-5, when the students reach the 3rd grade, and grades 4 to 5, they're all going to be reading grade level text, and some of them might not be ready for grade level text. That's problem number 1. But problem number 2, in core knowledge, it is based on a coherent sequence of knowledge. So if you go into the 3rd grade, for example, they read about the War of 1812, but they don't know what a colony is. They don't know what the American Revolution was. They don't know what impressment was. They didn't learn that because that was in core knowledge K-2. But if you didn't have core knowledge K-2, you don't know that. So you have a double whammy. You have kids who are far behind in reading are going to have text that is at grade level, and it also assumes background knowledge that they don't have. So that's a major problem. I tell districts, if you're going to adopt core knowledge, there's a lot of great things to it. Adopt it a year or year at a time, or start with K and 1. Again, I'm being very honest. I have not seen strong professional development from Amplify. It's a modular program. All of these programs except Bookworms are modular, means they have 6 to 8 week modules. That's a change for many teachers, and that's one of the things. Wit and Wisdom has a separate foundational skills program that is not part of Wit and Wisdom. They recommend the use of foundations. They have written some beautiful decodables called geodes that are the most beautiful decodes in the history of our galaxy and possibly a few others. But you have to use foundations. Foundations it's a systematic phonics program, but you got to go, you got to get foundations, you got to pay for foundations, then you got to go and you got to get geodes and pay for geodes. It's really nice to have everything under one program.
And that's all separate from professional learning as well.
That's right.
Some schools have combined Wit and Wisdom with CKLA with the skills only. The state of Tennessee has actually just made an OER version of the CKLA skills. We built out a really strong phonemic awareness curriculum for them that's pre-K to 2 to match the skills, because it didn't have phonemic awareness. That's available for free on State of Tennessee's website. So some schools are doing that. It's too heavy lifts though. Wit and Wisdom's hard to learn. Core knowledge skills is hard to learn. So, and not integrated. So, but it does lower the price.
It's a big lift. Well, we'll talk more about how much of a lift it is for your teachers, but Wit and Wisdom integrates art with its programs. In other words, if you're studying, let's say they have a module on Japanese internment, they will have some art from the Japanese people who were interned. They will also have some art from the other texts about, I forgot the name of it. It's about an American prisoner of war from Japan. So they integrate art very nicely into their program, into everything. EL education, as some of you are familiar with, is very strong on foundational skills. As with all of these programs, strong on knowledge, strong on vocabulary. EL education is particularly good on English language learners support. It also has a social activism element to it. In fact, every module. If they have a module, for example, on birds in the 2nd grade, at the end of that module, the final assignment is how can we protect bird habitats? How can we protect birds who are in danger? Everything. They even have social activism at the end of their 1st grade module on toys. I don't remember what it is. Getting toys to children who don't have toys. I don't know what. Everything ends with social activism. It's EL education is one of the stronger ones on independent volume of reading. PL education, professional development. I don't know if I said this. I have not been impressed by the professional development for core knowledge. The professional development for Wit and Wisdom, I just don't know as well as I'd like to. Some of it I've seen is good.
They hire teachers in the summers to, so it's each one teach one. It's actually quite a beautiful model. Bookworms is doing something similar. EL has standalone professional learning. I have a feeling Oakland would get good professional learning.
You definitely will. They would love to work.
For Bookworms or EL.
They would love to. Both of those programs, you can guarantee you're going to get excellent professional development.
Simply because Open Up Resources is California based, and I think has an equity mission in state. Bookworms
is strong on foundational skills, strong in knowledge. ELL support, English learning language support, is built in very nicely. It's not a modular program. It goes book by book. You work on a full-length book. I'll talk more about this in usability. But the unit of structure and function is the book. You read one book about immigration, and you read another book that's fiction, and you read another book about
full-length books.
Yeah, all full-length books. They also incorporate read aloud K to 5, which is really hugely important, because if kids' vocabulary is not what it should be in kindergarten and 1st grade, they're not going to learn the words by what they read that they need to know by what they read in kindergarten and 1st grade. And Bookworms is the only one that has read aloud K to 5. And that read aloud is with grade level complex text all along. And as Meredith said, you'll have very strong PD. American Reading Company is a program you might not be familiar with.
I want to actually address, well, sorry, I was attending to the excellent chat, but if we stop there, we'd come to a halt. But Bookworms is interesting because it was, I know Ed Reports has come up as a question, and I'll just address it frontally now. We worked with Ed Reports. We first stood them up. David trained their first 2 years of reviewers. They took the tool grew out of Student Achievement Partners IMAT, which is an instructional materials evaluation tool, which is big and clunky. Ed Reports made theirs even bigger and clunkier. They love modular programs, and they could not get their head around the idea that full-length nonfiction books build knowledge. They couldn't, their tool couldn't work for that when they reviewed, which was about 2 years ago. We've also seen, I don't know a nice way to say it, not mission creep, but inflationary creep on Ed Reports reports. Everything glows green now. All the major market basals, all the 3 big publishers have released horrible new basals, fat, bloated basals. They make even a bit like slimmer than some of these. And they all went all green on Ed Reports. That is really a wrong message to the field. They don't grow knowledge. They are not, usability is awful. So we've had a little bit of disappointment, shall we say, with Ed Reports recently. And if anybody here is an Ed Reports reviewer or has an affiliation, I apologize, but we do speak our truth. So Ed Reports is not something to take completely to the bank. We always say it's a starting place, but you need to do your own homework. You need to talk to other districts. You need to find out for yourselves what it's like for people to use these programs, and not just begin and end with Ed Reports at all.
Ed Reports does not evaluate usability in any significant way, and refuses flat out to take into account student outcomes. The last I checked, student outcomes is something that we're all interested in, and they won't build that into their algorithms or into their review system at all. I think
anyway, so that's the Bookworms question. Does it do it in modular, sort of intense 360 ways, the way EL does it, or Great Wit and Wisdom does it, or Core Knowledge does it? It's the Western canon, but it does it. No, it's more 3 or 4 weeks on a topic. It's shorter, which a lot of kids like, and sometimes, and teachers, some people get tired of 8 weeks of birds, truthfully. So it's different.
ARC, American Reading Company, strong on knowledge. This is a smaller company and very aggressive
Woman
in a good way.
Minority owned, though.
Yes, strong on knowledge, strong on vocabulary, strong on foundational skills, including phonemic awareness. They have a learning curve, which we'll talk about, but super strong professional development. They work closely with customers.
And they customize titles.
Right, and it's the only program where you can kind of choose your own text and it fits into the model, which is actually pretty advantageous in the era that we're entering in, that we're well into with anti-racism and equity. In these other programs, the texts are there. They can't go out and get a new text. If this is their 4th grade suite of text, it's their 4th grade suite of text.
With Bookworms and ARC both can. And ARC exists 100% that's true.
ARC can.
Right, ARC exists 100% in Spanish language edition. So in that way, it's Reading Wonders. I am of the basals. I do like Reading Wonders. ELD, the California Created English Language Suite, I would actually almost use it instead of Wonders for everybody. But I know more about. Yeah, I don't know if you want me to talk about Wonders at all, because we.
Why don't you wait till the end and see how we're doing with time?
What I'd like to do right now, thank you all for opening up with that. There are some specific questions that I think could guide things a little bit that have been pre-submitted. And I want to share one with you and get your response. If you could address that, and then from there you can go in different directions as you see fit. But let me just roll out this question. I'm going to share my screen so everybody can see it. This was submitted by Cassie Purnham with the Oakland Literacy Coalition. And there we go. I'll just read it. I'm participating in an engagement committee that OUSD has convened for the ELA process. They've said that foundational literacy and dyslexia are weaknesses of a couple of the curriculum that they're piloting, EL education and benchmark literacy, and have said that foundational literacy instruction could be provided through other programs like SIPS for phonics, or Haggerty for phonemic awareness, Inspire for kids with dyslexia. So they were less concerned about the primary literacy curriculum being strong in those foundational skill areas. Given the overwhelming numbers of kids in OUSD failing to adequately learn foundational skills, I'm concerned this isn't a higher priority. Curious to know whether you think these should be integral parts of a core curriculum or whether they can be effectively taught through supplemental programs. If so, what needs to be in place for an approach that utilizes several curricula to be effective? What should districts prioritize as part of the core curriculum? You get the general idea. Should things be broken out and have multiple things that cover for missing areas? And if so, what should the main thing be?
I never taught kindergarten, first or second grade, but I was principal of a school for 10 years that had one. And I know that the easier and more consistent you make everything when you're trying to teach 25 young children how to learn to read, some of those children, or 30, some of those children having high needs of all kinds, the more smooth and easy your curriculum is to implement, the absolute better that you are. Teacher usability does not get factored in nearly as much as it should. Whenever you're bringing in two curriculums, even if both of them are brilliant, and you've got to synchronize and synthesize those two curriculums, unless there's an overwhelmingly necessary reason to do that, I would absolutely avoid that. Any school or district that I've known that has tried to do it has wished that they had something in one core ELA program that worked and didn't have to do that.
Okay. Well, then the follow-up question.
The other thing about that, Kareem and everybody, is that coherence and that solid EL, if you get a program like EL Education or Bookworms or CKLA that has solid foundational skills, is you won't have so many kids identified as dyslexic or not learning to read. You will fall back to the organic, the people who actually exist with organic learning disabilities. So you won't, bad instruction will go away. So where it's the fault of instruction and systemic forces are making too many kids not learn to read. You shouldn't have numbers like that. You should have like 87% of kids learning to read, some with more time and attention, some with lots more practice opportunities, which these good programs provide. And then you can pounce and give kids the services and the integrated services, hopefully, that those kids need to get the times you go up toward that 100% of kids decoding and having a shot at staying on grade level. So that's the other thing that's provided for that is the sound instruction keeps the kids in the ball game during tier 1 instruction. That's where you want to get. You don't want a weird inverted pyramid where everybody's getting remediated. There's something badly wrong.
That's what's happening right now.
There's
a lot of kids
really
getting remediated. Our special ed class is bloated. It's really making, and this is important for fiduciaries and for trustees and potential trustees to know. The instability of our budget, a large part is due to the cost of special ed, which is in large part related to the fact that kids aren't getting these foundational literacy skills, and the special ed then is where they're being sent. So 80% of kids with a learning disability have a primary cause of reading. So this is about fiscal solvency just as much as it is kids learning. So a related question to that is there a class, or what are the curricula, the ones that show evidence? Is there a class of curricula that is self-contained, that has all the pieces together instead of having this curriculum and that curriculum and piecing it together? Are there a couple, 2 or 3 or so, that stand out from the others as being self-contained like that?
EL is self-contained, as I think you guys know. Wit and Wisdom is not self-contained because you have to go out and get a separate foundational skills program, foundations, and you even have to get a separate decodable reader, although it's written by Wit and Wisdom people. Core Knowledge Language Arts is self-contained and now has the additional input on phonemic awareness that was done by a program that Meredith and I ran. American Reading Company is self-contained. Bookworms is self-contained. So the only one of the programs that we feel meet all of the criteria that is not self-contained is Wit and Wisdom. And I'm not, there's many things about Wit and Wisdom I love. Full disclosure, the woman who runs it is one of our favorite teachers of all time from our old school. But I really think it's problematic to not have the K-2 language arts built into the program. I really think it's problematic to have to go out and get another program and buy another program and train your teachers on another program, and then have decodables that may be aligned with the other program, but are still a separate entity.
And expensive. The decodables cost $3,000 a classroom. They are beautiful, but they are a fortune.
I want to be clear though, that other than that, that is a beautiful program. It has the best texts of all, although they're very complex for sure. It has these heuristics on helping teachers figure out how to work with grade level complex text for all students. Its assessments are A, thorough, B, aligned with the assessments that we see in the era of the Common Core, and C, quite meaningful in many ways. So there's a lot of good things about Wit and Wisdom, but you've got to overcome that hurdle with foundational skills. And what Meredith said is, and Kareem, a lot of kids are being referred to special ed, or if they don't make it to special ed, they're in some kind of tier 2 intervention program, and they shouldn't be there. If you have the foundational skills program that is right, then you will get far less kids in that kind of problem. And with Wit and Wisdom, you've got to put all that together, which is sometimes difficult for our teachers. You got to keep teachers' needs at the top of a lot of things. Teaching, I've been a consultant, I've been a principal, I've been a teacher. Nothing is harder than teaching. Being a principal might be more aggravating, but it's not harder. You can escape to your office. There's no escape when you teach. You're up front, you're working 25 to 30, and when it's young children. So that's something to just keep in mind strongly.
And it's complicated.
So David, and Meredith, we also have the issue of, you talked about building knowledge. So we also, along with ELA, science and social studies, et cetera, building knowledge means these other disciplines as well. And after the ELA, then we've got to address curriculum adoptions in these other programs as well, other disciplines as well. Do you have a recommendation? Are there any curricula that actually incorporate those things in a way that builds, that uses text complexity in the right way, but also builds the knowledge that kids need? Can you speak a little bit to that?
I don't know. Well, two things. First of all, in any of these programs that we've mentioned, every single one of them, the students are going to be learning more science and more history/social studies than ever before, because they're all knowledge-based programs. So they're built around, those modules are based on immigration, weather, World War II, et cetera. They're all knowledge, they're all habitats, they're all knowledge-based. So they're going to be learning far more knowledge than they have before. We could talk about some science and social studies programs. Well, not social studies, because I don't know anyone that's good at the elementary level, but there are some science ones. But I don't know if you really want to spend time on that now, because I would strongly recommend not getting any new programs while you're bringing in a new core ELA program. I think you need to give teachers at least 2 years to get comfortable with those programs before you bring in a new one, especially if they're going to be learning science and social studies. So if you really want me to, we can talk about a science program that we like. It's up to you.
No. I just thought maybe there's something that might be integrated or what have you. I know the importance of building knowledge is there. And
Right. Core knowledge, EL education, and Wit and Wisdom, and bookworms, and ARC. They all do build social studies. Their units are primarily science or social studies or arts units. So they integrate. But I agree with David, letting teachers, again, learn, giving students and teachers time to learn. They're going to be learning so much more than they have for years. And it also it sort of stretches the school day a little bit if you need more time. EL education can take up to 3 hours a day. So that's a lot of instructional time if you do it right. So, and if you don't do it right, you are not going to get results. So much better to invest the time and energy and attention in this massive investment that you're making and give teachers a fighting chance to do it well.
So
we'll take the questions you think are most helpful now.
Well, first, why don't we get to the end in mind? What should school board members, what should the curriculum selection committee, what are things that they need to know? as they go through this process? What should board members know as they have to deal with, approving whatever comes down the pike? And what should key staff members know about this? That assuming that we are starting from scratch, what are some things that we should absolutely keep in mind in terms of which curriculums we should be considering in terms of getting the most kids to be where they need to be?
Well, I want to talk about usability. English language, EL education is by far the most complex and the most difficult for teachers to learn to implement. We made modifications in Model Detroit, and we will introduce you to the people who are leading the Detroit school system, who we worked with for years, and those modifications helped, but it is an extremely complex curriculum. You're going to get great PD, but you need to know that that there's a steep learning curve.
And if teachers aren't bought in and brought in and believe in it, and it's a lot of work for teachers who didn't feel like they had any say in it, a lot of work. So.
And then you've got to consider turnover. Mm-hmm. If there's a lot of turnover in your district, then all these new teachers have to go through the learning curve for EL every single year. Bookworms is on the other end of the spectrum. It is by far the simplest to learn. The learning curve is far less than it is in the others. That's why Bookworms right now gets far stronger student outcomes within 1 year or 2 years than any of the other programs. The other three programs we've been talking about, Written Wisdom, Core Knowledge, and American Reading Company, are kind of in between in terms of implementation. So what a board has to understand when they look at these programs and they look at the usability of these programs and they look at how these programs are similar or different to what your teachers are used to, what are your resources for professional development? What are your resources to make any corrections or any stopgap type of measures? What is your teacher turnover? And how are your teachers going to react? I think that's essential because all the programs we've been talking about are aligned to the standards. Every single one of them, all of them grow knowledge, every single one of them, all of them grow vocabulary, every single one of them, all of them except Written Wisdom have a strong foundational skills program built in. Written Wisdom, you could go out and get a strong foundational skills program, as we've said more than one time. But if you do that, then you've got it, but you've got the additional work. So I think what a board needs to focus on is what's going to maximize our chance of getting results. There's a expression in sports, something along the lines of nothing improves morale like winning. Nothing improves morale like increase in student outcomes. So what is going to get us student outcomes in a relatively short period of time should be seriously looked at by your board and your stakeholders. And usability, like we've been talking about, should be seriously looked at by your board and your stakeholders.
When you say usability, what specifically do you mean? I saw that question pop up.
How many different parts do I have to put together? For example, for EL education, you have a foundational skills program, scientifically based and sound, and a lot of fun, I might add. But the way they organized it, you've got a whole class lesson that everybody gets, and then you break up into 3 to 5 different groups based on where you're at on your systematic phonics knowledge. And the teacher has to organize those 3 to 5 different groups. They have to get the materials for 3 to 5 different groups. They have to plan a lesson for 3 to 5 different groups. They have to plan a lesson for the whole class. That would be an example of implementation. They have the modules. The modules for EL education are fantastic. Some of those modules involve collecting like 15 or 16 different sets of materials because they're like hands-on. EL came out of Outward Bound. They're a great believer in teamwork and hands-on work. A lot of our teachers aren't used to hands-on work and collecting 13 or 14 different artifacts for an English language arts lesson. So that's a steep, those are 2 examples of a steep learning curve.
And the other examples, there may be 20 or 30 pages to read before every lesson for the modules. So you've got the whole foundational skills side, what David described, but then you have the ELA modules that have also a ton of teacher preparation and reading. So we have there's a school near us, and we live in a rural area with low teacher turnover because it's too far to drive anywhere else. And EL was piloted, and one of the authors of the K2 materials led the pilot, an amazing PD person and talented educator. And she piloted with just 3 teachers that she knew. And they basically stopped in the spring and said, this is our family life is suffering. My marriage is suffering. I cannot recommend this to the district. They were really conscientious teachers, but they were working 6 hours a night because they were really trying to do all of it. So to do it well takes a lot of time and probably 3 years to ramp up and feel comfortable so that you can start to embellish and make it your own. It's a delightful curriculum, but that's it's a big price to pay.
What I like to do now, thank you for answering.
Stable teacher force.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Anyway, this is something to think about.
Thank you for answering that question. Appreciate it. I want to take a moment to invite Kampala to ask a question. If you could unmute yourself. We talked about it before, and she's a question she wanted to ask you all directly. So excuse me if I have any technical issues here. I'm trying to make sure that she can ask it. Kampala, are you on? Can you?
I am. Thank you so
great.
much.
Great.
I really want to thank you both for what you're sharing. What I've heard from a lot of teachers actually mirrors what you're saying as it relates to EL, the prep time, the usability of it, the amount of PD that's necessary, planning, and those things have been really stressful for educators that are piloting that program now. And in Oakland, we do have quite a bit of teacher turnover, which we are certainly trying to address. So my question, however, is around the cultural competency piece of all of this, all of these prepackaged programs. And what I thought I heard you say earlier was that there really isn't any at this moment. Given the moment that we are in today's history, it feels as though this is something that we can't ignore when we're looking at any kind of curriculum in the district. And so when we're thinking about making large investments in literacy curriculum, if we are knowingly purchasing something that does not meet the needs of our students, is this the moment to do so? Is this the moment to do so, or do we need to, work with some curriculum development companies to make something that's appropriate for Oakland?
So that is a great question, and I would say yes, this is the right moment, because all of these programs, Core Knowledge has a bit of a legacy and rep. They are trying, but I don't have as much faith in their ability to, and they have the farthest to become culturally relevant and culturally expansive. It would take a real reset, as Lori Letson Billings called it, which for schools. But American Reading Company in particular is already doing this work. You could take a look at their board of advisors. You'll see David's on it, but it's pretty impressive. We were on a meeting with them a few weeks ago, and they introduced people by tenure. Pedro Noguera is on there. Ron Walker, who runs, I can't remember his organization, it's Boston-based, Black Boys in Schools is his mission.
Black Boys something, but
yeah.
not the school.
Anyway, these programs are nimble and anxious to work with districts. I mean, Oakland, I think, basically you have to ask for what you want, and the smaller the company, open up resources which distributes bookworms and EL education. EL education itself, it has come out very clearly and said they need reform, they need guidance from users. So these groups, and Wit and Wisdom is on its own journey too. I don't know, they're nimble also. I don't know that they will be as responsive as EL education. And then open up resources, which is EL education plus bookworms. And then American Reading Company, I would say, is out in front of these. They all will work with you. You should demand that as a consumer. You should demand that for your children. And yes, this is a moment when they all are open to change, know they have to change. And you can get in on that. You can say, we want a price adjustment because we think we want you to swap these units out when you do better. We don't want to be stuck with this stuff for 7 years. I think you're in a position to ask, and this is the moment to ask.
Okay.
Okay.
Listen, I wanted to just say quickly, we're going to wrap up here soon. I'll probably be on my hands and knees begging you guys for the next couple of weeks to come back to do a part 2 just to get more questions in. But I do want to ask you this question. Would you recommend a district like Oakland having more than one curriculum? We've got different demographics. We've got hill schools, we've got flat schools. We got large Black populations and brown populations and white populations. We've got we're all over the place. Is it better to just say, we'll just do 2? You got 2 choices and go from there? Or to separate by grade level and say, 4th grade and up, you're going to do this, but TK, K1, 2, 3, you're going to do this, focus on foundational stuff, whatever. Do you recommend splitting it or keeping it solid? What would you recommend to a district?
I wouldn't recommend splitting it by grade for sure. That goes back to what we said before. You got
There's a really eloquent comment that everybody should read from a P8 principal.
So you got, what we said before, you got some K to 2 doing one thing and 3 to 5 doing another, and maybe 6 to 8 doing another. I wouldn't recommend that. But in terms of schools, this goes back to your very informative chart that you made, Kareem. You got some schools that with a broad curriculum, the students learn to read. And if they've been succeeding and learning to read with a broad curriculum, now that broad curriculum might not be, an equity-drenched or anti-racist curriculum at all. But it's getting those kids to read, and you could certainly, as a district, consider letting those schools that are scoring high with this kind of broad curriculum go ahead and use that. Then the question becomes, these curriculum vary enormously in usability, as I've been talking about with bookworms versus the others. I can see a situation where some schools, none of the schools have the element of equity and anti-racism that they need to have, none of them. But EL comes the closest because of its emphasis on social activism. And there may be some of your schools that is really important to them. And the changes you would have to make to get a curriculum that reflects our times and the needs of all of our children now might be less in EL than it is in certainly than in core knowledge or even written wisdom or bookworms. So that's something to consider. What American Reading Company has, Meredith touched on this, to compile, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing it right, compile is a very good question, is a huge difference with American Reading Company. With all these other programs, they have the books depicted and the questions and activities and assessments and tasks are based on those books specifically. So you can't just change the book. With American Reading Company, it doesn't work that way. They do have books that are recommended as part of their units, but the questions are made by the teachers based on the standards. So what they do, which is a plus and a minus. The plus is that you can fit in any book. And then the instructions are to look at the standards, and your questions and your tasks and activities should reflect the standards for whatever book you choose. Now, the plus there is you can go out and get a book that is more in tune with what your students need at this time. The minus is that there's a learning curve for teachers to create those questions from the standards. So I think what the final word on that is you need to talk to all of these publishers, and we can introduce you or anything like that you want. But that's a big difference with American Reading Company. I think, Kareem, it's feasible for a district of your size and your nature to not necessarily have to have the same curriculum for everybody. And I think, in fact, it might be advantageous to think along those lines.
Okay. I got to get you guys to come back.
Yeah, well, flu.
Well, it's COVID, Kareem. We're not going anywhere.
Right. So I just want to thank you for your time.
We would have loved to come back to Oakland. I can tell you a great story about our first trip there.
I just also want to lift up Michael Ray, who's leading the curriculum selection work right now with the committee. They've got their hands full. Like, you got to find something that works for kids for all kids. That means targeting through with the equity lens the folks down in that lower left-hand quadrant. And it's not easy because there are a lot of publishers out there making a lot of money off our kids. We got to find out what works, what's usable for teachers, what has evidence. They're not guinea pigs. So we appreciate your insight, and we just want to lift up and support the Curriculum Selection Committee. I don't know when they meet next or whatever. Thank you for your partnership on that. And for those of you who are on the board or potential board candidates, please, 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 as David and Meredith suggested, you got to ask good questions around what's the evidence that it works. Because at the end of the day, from an NAACP lens, this is a civil rights issue. Our kids absolutely have the right to access quality education, and we see literacy as a part of that. And if there's evidence that says you've got 2 or 3 programs that work, and evidence that says, and a lack of evidence on the other ones, we choose one of the other ones, that's our job, is to monitor that type of stuff. Our legal defense team eats that up for lunch. So please, we're asking you to be vigilant, not only in your fiduciary responsibility, but also as representatives of our families and our communities. Thank you all for joining. I will be talking with David and Meredith, trying to get a part 2 scheduled. The question came up about the recording for this. If you RSVP, I will send this out to you. If you did not RSVP, but you do want the recording, maybe you came in through a friend or whatever, just shoot us an email, and then that way we can send it to you directly. This will be part 1, and hopefully we can schedule a part 2 soon. Okay. Thank you, everyone. David and Meredith,
yes,
if you have a
Amanda
final
just
word.
asked about the research. We can get that to everybody through Kareem.
Yeah, if you do that, I'd like to send it all in one package. Cynthia, do you
Yeah,
have anything you want to say to close us
that's
out?
David.
Cynthia Adams, did you? Not sure if she's on. If she's on, but I don't know. Let's see. Well, then I'll close this out. Actually, I'll give you the last word. David and Meredith.
I'm on.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Kareem, for putting this together. Thank you for putting this together, and looking forward for the second half of it. And I have to jump off and go into another Zoom. So thanks again, Marriott. You guys are coming all the way in to help Oakland see something different. Thank you.
All right.
Well, thank you for letting us talk to you all, and good luck. Be good stewards of
Thank
kids.
you. We'll be in touch, and you all look for those the next RSVP for part 2. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. You're very welcome.